And here we go. Guys, welcome to another episode of Funky Marketing Podcast. Today, we're going to have a special guest, somebody who's, as I say, unafraid to break the rules, Gwen Lafage. She's VP of Marketing at Sinch with over a decade in B2B branding. Gwen has pushed some boundaries from running an art gallery, if I'm not wrong, in San Francisco, to running a global brand strategy at one of the um, fast growing tech companies. And you don't do that, but running is safe. So, Gwen, welcome to the show. And did I get it all right?
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I mean, you're one of the few people you know, whose content I'm constantly consuming on LinkedIn, and branding is one of my favorite stuff. I mean, my company is called Funky Marketing in this
Right.
podcast. So,
Yeah. I like it. I like the name. I like when marketing gets funky.
yeah, I had a problem when I started because a lot of people from UK say, funk as a garbage. I say no, that's like funky music. So I need to explain that.
Yeah, I can see.
But okay, it goes with the name. So explaining and starting conversations and those kind of things. That's always a good thing. But talking about those kind of misconceptions, let's start with with one thing. Do you have any misconception, something that's absurd that you had to debunk when it comes to branding?
Well, I think we have to explain in B2B a lot what brand is, right? It's like at the core of it, like the starting point. There's a misconception on what brand really is, right? And a lot of time you have to explain that it's not just your logo and it's not just your colors. Yes, we have a brand. Look, we have three colors and a logo. And I think like yes, I will say all companies probably have some element of brands, but it like goes way beyond just their logo and their color. So they have a brand, they just don't know exactly what it is. And I think that's usually like what we have to explain over and over again, right? Like that what it is and that is connected to the story and connected to like the authenticity at the core of the company rather than just being the trademark of it, which is kind of your logo. That's not what your brand is, right? I mean, it's part of it, but it's not only. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people still, I don't know why, I'm just preparing a speech for a brand talks conference in Bulgaria. And I see still a lot of people connect brand with B2C, right?
Right.
Like that's something that's unique from B2C. And, most of the brands that we know in the world are connected to the B2C. But there are some that I think are kind of crossing the boundaries with like Netflix, like Airbnb, like going halfway to meet us,
Right.
and having the personalized experience, those kind of things. And when people have that kind of experience in B2C, they want to also have it in B2B environment.
Right. Yeah. I think it's, I would say to me, like every company in a way has a brand, whether they have like a good, strong brand or like a very weak one. That's a different thing, but I think as soon as like you have like a company, if you think about what brand is, to me it's also how you perceived by your clients and the your market. And so you always have a perception attached to what your company is and what your company does. And so I think whether you like it or not, or whether you want it or not, in a way you have a brand. Then the kind of act of like doing branding or like what we call brand within like a company or like when you have brand and your job title, to me is like how you can influence the perception that your company has. And so your role is to influence that brand, and that's when your logo and your colors and your story and everything you do kind of impact it. But it's there, it's just like how you shape it. So some companies just don't shape it, let others shape it. And I think that's where they go wrong. They said we don't really need to shape it in B2B. And like, well, you do if you want people to think like you, right? Like if you want to improve how you perceive.
Yeah, and I think it has a lot of things to do. Like I went into the B2B around 2019, something like that.
Mhm.
And like at the time, people were still thinking about accounts as a factory, as a building, right? Not as a group of people inside that company that you need to, to learn how to help them get better at their job to be able to sell them.
Right.
And it's just 5 years before now. And I think it's changing, but it takes a little bit of time. And I think people are still learning that every experience that you have with a company comes down to kind of forming their opinion about the company and consideration will they buy from you or no, and that's
Mhm.
actually brand. I mean, that's how I see it.
Yep. Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's how I see it too. And I think that's why brand is not just like one person in the company or just like even a function. It really is kind of a strategic approach on like how you shape your narrative, how you shape the perception. And that's where there's like the biggest misconception, right, on what exactly is brand. And then like how you can really shape it. But I think it's a tricky one when you like have brand in your title, because like people don't exactly know what you do, and like some people say, well, we don't really need brand, and it's like, well, it's not because you don't have someone that does brand inside of the company that you don't have one, and that you don't do marketing efforts and communication efforts to actually shape it. So I think you can do brand or in a way or influence it without having people with that job title.
Yeah, I think one of the things that kind of got us where we are, so companies not yet realizing what brand is and the power of it and all these things, is that in the product teams inside, especially in tech companies, in whole that sphere, is that usually they are inbound oriented.
Mhm.
So only technical people working on building a product, right? But there's no outbound oriented people who actually shape the narrative, the story, and everything else while they are building the product, right? They build the product and they say, okay, now we're going to market it.
Right.
And now we're going to start creating.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it's like the company that succeed at creating a very consistent experience between their outside narrative and their outside communication, whether we want to call it brand, and their product experience are to me the most successful, right? Like you can think for, I think we all have the same examples in mind when it comes to B2B, but I think like a company like Slack to me have like managed to build that consistency, and you can see that the way they talk within their product and the product experience is connected to the external experience, and that's the consistency of building that brand beyond just like a product, right? The functionality of a product. So I think like the UX element and delivering like a very consistent experience within the product in a good personal way with personality of a different approach to it. I think that is tied to having a brand and having a personality.
Yeah, I totally agree. So usually when I think about B2B, it's like playing it safe. You know,
Mhm.
let's try not to get to extremes,
Right.
right? And it usually gets to all of the companies being vanilla and not differentiating in a space when how many, for example, like SaaS companies, you have like 3 millions or
Yeah.
something like that. I always have in my mind that picture of all the logos, right?
Yes.
And basically branding, you usually say it, I remember it from the posts and everything, branding is the only true differentiator that can be copied.
Mhm.
So why on the other hand are companies so obsessed with like talking about product features and all those technical stuff?
I think because there is still this conception that in B2B, companies make very rational purchase, and that because there is a long sales process and because like the evaluation is long, and usually it's like the product is bought through like a committee of people, we think that the decisions that are made are very rational, and that like we don't need to like build that emotional connection or like go beyond those like features because that's what people are looking for. But I believe that you need to build a brand and an emotional connection with the product so that when people with the product or with the company, so that that job starts before, like so that when people um, have evaluated or like defined the problem that they have, they already have in mind which company can help them. So it's really associating the problem you're solving and how you approach it with before it gets to like the product features, right? Like if
Mm-hmm.
you are only focusing on product features, like most companies and most SaaS companies can are very similar, right? You get into like that feature to feature comparison, price to price comparison, and then how do you really differentiate is very rarely with like those little features. Yes, it can get down to price, but I think the job of the marketers and the jobs of branding starts before because you want to be in that consideration list, and in order to be there you need to already be in the mind of the people and the buying committee and be known by them and remembered by them before that. And in order to get there, you definitely need to kind of build that connection and stand out, right? Like, so I think that's where you need that branding so that it's not just about your features. Yeah.
Yeah, but even as we look at the feature, usually how you differentiate is you come up with building a product, or it can be a feature that your competitors don't have. So it should be like easier to come up with a story, with a narrative around one feature, right? It seems like B2B companies love mediocrity.
Mhm.
Kind of seems like that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like diminishing the product to like very to only focus on some of the features. And I think that when companies or software, right, like someone that start a new software, they decide to launch their company, especially in a crowded space, and most spaces are crowded, right? Like, so it's because they found a new way to solve a problem. So yes, it might be a feature or a combination of feature, but it's mostly a new, I'm hoping, a new mindset and a new kind of way to approach the problem. And that's what they need to focus on rather than saying, hey, we have like a drag and drop feature. Well, it's not so much about the drag and drop feature, it's about like what does that bring to solving the problem. Like you make it easier, you like, so I think there's also this misconception that when we talk about brand and we talk about creating an emotional connection, we are not talking about the product at all, and we're like kind of being fluffy and like have no connection to what the company does. And that's not true, right? Like you cannot build a brand without having that connection between the brand and the product. Like I will even say that in SaaS companies that offer one product, often the narrative of the product and the brand are very connected. They like kind of one. When the companies offer like a entire portfolio, yes, obviously you like need to have a brand narrative that is slightly bigger and slightly disconnected to each product because you need to tell a bigger story. But it's a one product, one brand, one company, then they're very linked together. It doesn't mean that you don't have a brand, it just means that you focusing on the one problem or like the problem your product is solving, and it's a little bit of an easier narrative. But it's still storytelling, right? You still need to like bring it into saying things with a personality, or like bringing your brand personality to the table and bring storytelling into it and build like those tell human stories of your clients, of the people, what you're doing for them, how you're solving the problem, your internal people becoming more kind of brand ambassadors. And that's how you build that emotional connection. So it's not so much like it's still emotional in the sense that you see how your product build something that has value for people, beyond just like, oh, here's a drag and drop and our price is lower, right? So I think that's also, again, some of the misconception and the thing that I have to explain when I say to people, I believe we need to create this emotional connection, and they're like, no, the purchase is rational. I'm like,
Yeah.
not fully, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I had Rory Sutherland to talk about all the biases in B2B for the whole episode, and I didn't get to ask more than 3 questions. He was nailing examples one after the other. I'm like, yes, people need to hear this.
Yeah.
So tell me, usually when we go and think about creating a brand, especially like brave brands, it means go big with a big story, with solving, around the problem that we are solving. But to be able to do that, we need to get the buy-in from decision makers, right? From the
Mhm.
CEO. Sometimes if it's in the lower stage, that it's a founder. Um, how do you start with communicating those things? I mean, usually they need to be involved, right, in that from the
Yes,
start.
they need to be involved from the start. I believe that like the story and the narrative usually comes from the top, because you have to like understand the reason why the company actually created that product in the first place. um yes, of course, a lot of funders, and like, we're not blind, they like thinking, hey, I'm going to make money. I can see like there is there's a need, I'm going to create this and I'm going to make money with it. But I think like it needs to go beyond that, and usually funders are very passionate about what they're building, right? It's not just about making money. It's usually because they see a need, or they see like how a problem is being solved or not solved today, and they find a solution that can solve it in a better way. So like, they're usually connected to like helping people solve a problem they have, and so they can tell that story in a good way, and they usually have the knowledge and the understanding of the market, that I think not maybe everybody in the company has. So they need to be involved, because they need to like drive that story in some ways, and they need to believe in it. If like it's, we build it more for them, right? Like, or with them, they need to be the best ambassador of it. Otherwise, it won't work. If it's like, if you feel that like brand and your kind of company narrative come from like marketing, and it's just like a marketing exercise, it just doesn't work. It needs to be like a cross-functional approach that is really linked to the strategy of the company, and not just marketing trying to put pretty words on like something that is kind of there but not exactly there. So I think that's, it's difficult, because that means that you need the understanding from the leadership of what we're trying to do with kind of that narrative, and what that story is, and how it can really drive the strategy from their head and like their strategic meetings to the sales team selling it, and the customer success living it, and the marketing team using it in their efforts, right? So it needs to be very cross-functional. um, that's the tricky part. I will say.
Yeah, it is. It is. And you reminded me of one important thing that I always get as the most difficult when crafting the strategic narrative and those kind of things. It's, you actually need to find the proof that it's not all in your head, meaning data, information, stats, all those things, to prove to the people that, the narrative, the story that you are going with, it's not only in your head, that it's actually happening. They can feel it, they can see it,
Mhm.
and that kind of connects the narrative, the story with the reality that's happening.
Right. No, exactly. And I think it's like connected with like what they have in their head. And if they come from like product and engineering, and like, and connect to the customer, right? Like, on what it is that you are like exactly solving, and does that resonate with your audience? Like, are you creating a product that actually solves something that people are trying to solve? Because I mean, I've seen product being built and like, yeah, great product, but who cares? And does that really solve like a problem that people have or not really, right? Like, so I think it's where it really needs to connect to like the end user or the buyers and make them understand that like this solution is going to be solving their problems. And I think there is like often I see a bit of a disconnect as well on like how people talk about creating demand, right? Like we see that a lot, especially on LinkedIn. And I know I had a bit of a rant about it last week on like this idea of like demand creation, right? Like don't think it's I don't think that marketing create really demand for like a for a solution as much as like helping companies identify maybe a problem they have or providing a new solution for a product they've already identified and probably already have a solution for, and they solving it in a better way. But I don't think that we can say that we're creating the demand. I think the demand is really created or like usually arise from within the company and within the needs that
Yeah.
they have. But what marketing can do and brand can do is one, help people better put words and identify the problem they have and understand that there are solutions for it, and then put your brand front and center as being the solution, right? So it's less about like creating the demand than it is about focusing on how your brand product solve that problem. So I think there's maybe like a bit of like stigma around brand in B2B. And so that's why we felt the need of like calling things new names. But the reality is like it's what marketing has always been, right? I feel like there's this tendency in B2B SaaS especially to reinvent marketing because SaaS is so different. And it's not really, right? It's like the principles of marketing are the same mostly. So it's just like understanding your market and like, building your brand, like all of it is just the same. What have mostly changed are the tactics and digital marketing, I will say, that wasn't there, before, but
Yeah, yeah. Well,
that's
also what I think changed, I mean, based on digitalization and all those things, is that we don't buy differently, but we buy in different places than we did before, right? We have offline, we have phones, then we call people, we have social media, then we have like small communities, when we have people that we follow, we trust, we know, so we can ask all those things. And basically you need, to be able to sell, you need to come up when, they need to say your name, right?
Mhm.
When somebody asks. But it's all, when you look at it, it's facilitating the sale,
Yeah.
getting people to the next step, then to the next one. And then people say, how many steps? As long as it's needed, right? Somebody buys once in 5 years,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
what brand does is actually gets you maybe not even, okay, you get on that list, short list of companies that they choose from. But a lot of times, if you are able to create the brand, then you don't get to the list. They choose
Mhm.
you even before they create the list, right? They say, okay, who is the brand person? I need to go and think about it. We need somebody to help us with. It's Gwen. She talks about brand. I comment on her posts. I know what she's talking about. She has this framework and those kind of things. Let me go. It's a no-brainer, right? And that's how powerful brand is. You can avoid all those things, consideration, comparison, all those other things if you have a brand.
100%. I think it's like it's being like top of mind, right? It's really like making like yourself known for something before people are looking for it, but mostly being remembered when they are looking for it. Because obviously, if they're not looking for it, and some will never look for it, like then it's not of use for you. But I think it's because you don't know who's going to be looking for it and when, right? You need to have kind of that broader appeal and that broader awareness, and activate like your brand and soul leadership so that you're known for something, so that when they need you, or if one day they need you, then they remember, oh yeah, wait, I know I've seen this and they were talking about this. And in order to get people to notice you, because I think that's also one of the biggest game here, is there is so much noise. There's so much noise. There's, like you said, million of like softwares. Like, it's really hard to stand out. And you first need people to like notice you. And in order to do that, you just need to break boundaries and like be different and do something so that they see, they notice you, and they like say, oh wait, what is this? Oh, that's fun. Or like, that's interesting. Or, oh, I like that story. And so you connect maybe with some people emotionally, before they actually need the product. And that's a way to be top of mind.
I totally agree. I've seen it on my own example for the personal branding, then for the company.
Mhm.
People were thinking in the first year that Funky Marketing is a brand, and I'm like, we are not even a year old. That's not happening, but it's good that we made that kind of perception.
Mhm.
But tell me about your framework, and tell me how do we get the company to execute it? I think that's the hardest part.
Yep. Yeah. So when you think framework, you mean like the brand framework that I
Yeah, yeah,
mentioned?
your
Yeah.
6C.
Yeah. Okay. The 6C. So I think it's like all the different elements. I was trying to like make it easier to understand how to like frame um brand, right? Like, and there's so many
Mm-hmm.
elements in it that I thought about this framework. And the first one, the first C is like category. Although in a way it starts with a C. I guess that's like why I also picked it. But the way I see category is building your positioning and like making yourself like unique in the way you're telling your narrative. And it's, the category building can be debatable in a way, like, but I feel I see it more as like defining the problem so that you can own the solution. So that's what I mean by like category. It's like this approach of like, you define the problem in a way you're getting associated by solving that problem, and that's you positioning and you building that. The second one is creativity, and that's something that like I believe a lot in, right? Like, I believe that like strong, brave brands push boundaries and do things differently and believe in creativity. And that we, especially I will say in B2B, that's how you get noticed, by doing things a bit differently and by embracing this creative thinking and being unique. So that's like a second one. Um, Content, which I think is like at the core of building your soul leadership and being perceived as like that trusted advisor before you start selling your product, right? Like, you need to like be known for providing guidance and being very knowledgeable in your space, and you do that through content. um
What that
Community.
creates community, right? Yeah.
Yes, community, which is like the other C, um, which you like build a, a fan club, I guess, around your brand, and help people connect, right? Like, help people connect and be the enabler of like those connection, right? It's really about like enabling people to connect around the problem or around your solution. I think there's different type of communities, but I think is very strong when you can do that, right? And some great examples, I guess, are like HubSpot community, like this, those like even Salesforce community with those trailblazers, right? Like those are like really strong communities of practitioners, but also people before that have embraced that like whole community, right? Where was I?
Consistency, right? Then we need to.
Consistency, exactly. Consistency, that's such an important part that I think in B2B is really hard because we we have this tendency of wanting to like renew things all the time, and we get tired of seeing the same like all the time. And I think we tend to follow a lot of the trends on like variation in the brand all the time. And it's also maybe because brand like isn't maybe established as the first thing you do, and you don't think about it first thing, then you don't establish like a your brand in the longevity, but do it like by spurs in a way. So I think the consistency is so important, because if you change your story and you change your colors and your logo all the time, you won't really establish that like image in your prospect mind or if the audience mind, right? Like it takes a long time to like really establish that. And if you look at like the very strong, very well-known brand, I guess a brand like Coca-Cola is a great example of like they've they've evolved their logo, but like look back, what with the logo in the first place and what it is today, it's so close, right? They haven't made a lot of changes, right?
Yeah.
They've owned certain element in their brand and they never changed them. They might evolve, and I believe in being in renewing it and being like on trend, but there's some core element that shouldn't really change. So I believe that's consistency. And then the 6C that I actually added after the first time that I presented this framework on a keynote is client and like customers, I'll say. So customers, because I believe the strongest brand are very customer focused, and they put the customers at the center of what they do. And that sounds very cliche, but at the same time they do it in a way that the customers become their ambassadors, and the customers become of the center of their brand. It goes together with community, but it's also a way for marketing team to tell human stories. Like so I believe in like going beyond like what you can do with your being product focused. Is like if you're becoming customer focused, you really build stronger brands and more human brands. So these are the 6 C's.
I mean, those are all the things that we need to do, but it's kind of, more useful if you look them at one place and we can connect the dots, right?
Mhm.
Usually, when you say brand, it's like overwhelming. It takes, I don't know, up to 2 years at least to come up with a brand. So it feels like, okay, we now have a brand, those kind of things. It takes time. But when you look at it, what it's included, and you know how much you need to work on it, then actually it makes it logical. It needs time to build.
Yeah, for sure. And that consistency is needed, right? Like to kind of build on it and continue to tell the story again and again, and get people to recognize you. It takes a while. People need to see you often to really like connect the dots in their mind.
Yeah, and you reminded me now of one thing while you were talking about the consistency and now reminding people. One of the mistakes that I'm seeing with the new challenger brands is they all appear in blue colors
Mm-hmm.
on LinkedIn, especially. But when you look at, and I'm asking them why, they're saying, we want to appear attractive to our customers, enterprise level clients, potential customers, right? Because they are blue, and I'm like, those are huge companies. Some of them are category leaders. Of course, they are blue. Now they can now say, okay, we are now blue. But when you don't have a brand and you just start with the lead gen campaign, I don't know, kind of people download the ebook and then you can try to sell to them without building a brand. If those people aren't ready, and in B2B they aren't ready when they just download the ebook, when they are ready, they will go and look and they will remember, I know the blue brand. So they will go to Google, they will go to social media, and what's the blue brand? Is the category leader, it's not you. Right? So they're basically building the awareness and getting more clients to their competitors, and they are not even aware of that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a mistake that is really made very often. Is like you need to appear a certain way because all your competitors appear a certain way, and that's where like the taking risk in B2B is difficult because people think, oh, that's what people are used to. So if we're not like that, we too different is not going to appeal to them. But I think it's again another misconception, right? Like, and I think in B2B companies are more scared to like do something different, and there's definitely a lot more at stake. But it's also, like you said, how you don't blend in, and that's the first battle, right? It's like the first battle is to stand out and be and getting like understood or like memorized. And if you don't do things slightly differently, you're just gonna get unnoticed. And like if people don't notice you, there's no way in like then trying to explain why they should go for you, right? Like, so I think there is like this perception of like being noticed before being fully relevant. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be relevant to our audiences, because I think obviously we should, but I think often we think for our audience and we think we know what
Yeah.
they will think about us, and it's like, well, they like blue, and they like blue means trust, and so we need to like be trusted, and we need to be like, yeah, corporate, feel professional, so we're going to go blue. But people are not, they use, I mean, people in companies buy products, right? They like you and me, they did, they don't buy like a cool brand, like they don't react to like something different. So I think it's because we have in mind how our audience might think, and especially when we think enterprise buyers, and especially if we said IT or like operation, or like, you know, those like this COO is never going to go for the pink brand because that's not a trusted brand. And like, well, is it though? Have you asked them what they really think? Because I don't think that it's really the case. I think there's a lot of people with a lot of different perception. And yes, there will be CEO and CTO that hate pink and don't think that your product should have that color. But a majority just don't really care. So it's like,
True.
yeah, it's not what they will go for and what they really is important for them. So I think it's understanding that the first battle you need to win is the battle of attention. And so if you win that attention, then you can tell your story, and it doesn't matter in what color you're saying it, right? Like, as long as you do something that is like relevant for them. So I think we also put probably too much focus on colors and too much meaning behind certain colors, where the overall look and feel and impression matters, but you first need to like stand out, and
Yeah,
then you can like, you know, gain the confidence and the trust. And colors, yes, but then content, right? There's different ways you can build.
yeah. They need to care enough to be able to react at all.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So tell me. So I'm thinking. Okay, we came up with the story, with the narrative. We know how we tell it. We created a buzz, but then we are a global company.
Mm-hmm.
So we are in Europe. we are in Balkans, for example, that's totally different. Then it's the US, which is kind of more similar to the Balkans than to the Europe. How do we adjust the message? How do we control the brand narrative and everything that we do and say in all those different markets?
I think the story needs to be authentic to your company and to the problem you're solving. And if those problems exist in all those different markets, right, like the narrative itself shouldn't change. What might change is how you tell the story, right? Like how you connect with the audiences. That might evolve, but I think you need to like stay authentic to yourself and say, okay, what is my own personality? And then of course you don't want to like come across as like not appealing to a certain like population. But I think you don't talk to like an Indian market exactly as you would to like a US market, but the core of the narrative and like shouldn't be different. Maybe you'll say it in a bit of a more formal way. But I think you also need to own that personality, right? Like, and again, we're like maybe a bit too afraid um, in B2B to not own it. A company like Apple, they don't really change. They're like way of being in the look and feel and the ad space on the market, whether it's good or bad. You know what I mean? It's like they kind of own their own style, and they're not going to make it completely different because it's in Brazil or India or in Sweden. um, I think you need to find that balance, and I think it's important to fully understand the culture and the local market, but it's equally important to keep that consistency and tell that one story and own your personality. So it's like how you find that balance, right? Like it's a tricky exercise, to be honest, and I think all global brands like probably come across that challenge at Sinch, where I work, right? Like we are a very global brand, and we sell in all of those markets, but we really have established, I will say, guidelines and like that can be used everywhere, and we want to push for that consistency with letting local markets play with it within a certain measure. I think the tone of voice is probably where things vary the most, because you probably don't talk to people in the same in India that you do in the US, but as in the same way, you probably don't exactly talk to people in the same way in financial services that you do in retail. So they're not just cultural differences, they can also be like vertical based. But you need to know who you are as a company and how you talk to like make those slight variation while keeping the consistency. It's a fine balance. Uh, Languages is another way, right? Like adapting, like localization and like adapting to the different language. Like do you do English everywhere, or do you do French and German, and like so that's also important. Again, it depends who you sell to, I will say, depend of the audience.
Yeah, I totally understand. One of the companies I've been working for years, Cyclopea, is one of the localization leader here in the Southeast Europe.
Right.
And working a lot with automotive, pharma industries, so they all have guidelines and all those kind of things. And it's a huge responsibility for the company to take over and adjust those things to the local markets. Especially if we look at like ex-Yugoslavia, it's like six countries,
Right.
but they all speak variation of a language,
Right.
right? And we are all different, so it's kind of totally different. And I remember the times when I first started doing marketing in the US and Canada, then got here to Serbia. And it was the time when we didn't use like stock photos, those kind of things, real people. We want to use only then. And one of the clients was accounting software, and he had everywhere people in suits. And I was like, "What the fuck is this? It's outdated. people in the globally don't use those things. And then, I had a freedom to test it out. So
Mhm.
I was the second man in the company, and the CEO told me, test it out. So I switched to real people from the company. Nobody reacted to anything. Facebook was the platform that was most active at the time. Nobody reacted to anything. So I switched again to people in suits, like 5,000 likes, 500 comments, 300 people signing up to the webinar just because of a different visuals. And I'm like, okay, people in Serbia perceive accountants as people in suits. So I think we use like 80% of the stock photos with people in suits from Google, like people in
Right.
suits on a moon, in a boat, on the ladders, whatever it is. But it worked, right?
Yeah, it's a tricky challenge, I think, for brands, like managing that local aspect with consistency. Because you want to associate your brand with something, and then I know I have this discussion with like my performance or the performance marketer in the company on like, okay, what do you mean by it works? Is also, it's also trying to understand. You have ads like, or like you say, that are direct sign up, or like when you approach direct to consumer ads, type of ads, right? But in B2B, we're not doing DDC, like we are mostly doing like long term. So it works maybe for people to click in an ad, but does that mean that like you are building your brand and you building like your recognition of the brand long term, and like they will associate you with something? Or are you making more people click? And you saying it works because more people are clicking, but ultimately, when is the last time that you really, like in B2B, anyone has clicked on an ad and actually bought the product? I think in maybe some self-serve aspect, right? Like you can click and buy and do a free trial and buy, but like most of the time, you is not through a click, right? So if your ads look like everybody else and you have stock photos of people in suit and it look like everyone in your space, maybe they click, but maybe it doesn't go anywhere. So I think it's also trying to be mindful on how we measure it works, because it depends what you're trying to do. Are your ads like for direct action, or are they building your long-term brand? And how do you manage those two kind of coming together? So again, that's like some of the discussion obviously I have as well in my job, right? Like on how we measure brand and how we measure this long-term perception. um yeah, it's if you tell Apple, well, if you put people in suit into your market, and that's how you want your ads to be, they will probably tell you, well, it doesn't work for us because it's more important for us that we build this long-term brand. And we believe our products can do that, and we show the product, and like, so we don't want to go for people in suits. So I think it's a fine line. We do A/B tests on ads as well, and we had this discussion between putting stock photos versus illustrations. A lot in some market will tell us illustration work better than putting people, and then in some
Exactly, that's
others,
what I wanted to say. It all depends on a market, on a
exactly.
country, on a target audience. For this specific example that I mentioned, for example, in Slovenia,
Yep.
animations of piglets work nicely. In
Right.
Serbia, no. So,
Yep.
and it's like country to country. So, but it's two different
It is.
markets.
And it is like trying to also probably build a brand that is multi-dimensional and that has that ability within the same guideline and the same kind of like creative direction to have those different elements. And you can have illustration, and you can have a certain way to present photos, and maybe a certain way to present graphic, and a certain way to do videos. All of them belong, and all of them are participating to creating this more versatile, stronger brand, because all the elements are in there and they work together, so that you give also the different market the possibility to like activate what works in their country. So that's something that is also difficult to do, but I think it's important when you're becoming a global brand. And you can see it with like global brands when they don't have a one way to activate a brand, they have multiple. And you will still recognize, oh, this is this brand, even if they don't have like the little, their illustration in there, and they have certain ways
Exactly.
of doing.
The consistency, right? And what I'm always saying, especially working a lot with procurement industry, like you need to have guardrails, and then it's much easier to be creative
Yes,
inside all those stuff.
exactly. And I think it's like defining what is the core of your brand, the thing that it will never change, and the thing that you can experiment around. And you might want to experiment for a specific campaign or for a specific event, and get more creative and like push the boundaries a bit more for something specific. But your core will always be there, and you need to define what is the core. What is the core of the brand? The one narrative, the like overall kind of story, maybe the core set of color or the one color, your logo, your kind of like core assets, right? Like your core brand assets that needs to be there, but allow experimentation around those so that you can also give creativity to some of the markets and give creativity to some of the creative in your company, right? Like have them push boundaries, because again, battle of attention, right? Like, so being within some guidelines but exploring within that.
Yeah, it leads me to one final question. So when you look at the next, we don't need to say 5 years, it can be 3 years, it can be a year, when B2B branding is heading, what will separate winners from the losers? Will it be consistency, creativity, the way we tell our story, or what is one thing that it's on top of your mind?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's going to be a bit cliche, and like, I think that the one B2B company that are going to continue to win are the one that are going to build a strong brand and have personality, especially as we're seeing everyone embracing AI, which I think is great and is like amazing for marketing teams, because it can bring so much efficiency and scalability to what we do. And in a way, makes creativity even more important. Um, because as we seeing it now, it's driving sameness even more. I feel like we've seen sameness when everyone started to embrace stock photos, and now we're going to see sameness when people start embracing AI. And you can see it in the content that is written and in like some of the creative stuff that is being done. And I think it's like how using AI, you can also own in on like a specific personality and getting very creative. So I feel like people that are companies that are like owning creativity, having a strong personality will win, and companies that focus on the human aspect. So I mentioned that like 6C, right, and the customer, and I think it's both the customers and the people within the company, um, that make those company that can become those ambassadors and those like so leaders. Don't really like, I know I mentioned so leadership and so leaders. I don't like that term, but I don't have a better one. But I feel it's like bringing up the humanity behind it. I think will keep being very important. Like in a world where you can have a podcast done by feeding an article to AI, and they create for you this like standard podcast of two people talking, and like the conversation is actually quite good and they're doing something, it's quite amazing. The personality of the people that took on a podcast and the personality of the people that you get on it and your customers and like showing real people stories is where you will win, because that will stay unique and that will stay yours, right? And no one will be able to kind of do that. And it's the same for us, right? As expert and new human being, I still believe that our uniqueness and I don't know, our background, our accents, like or who we are as people makes us different. And I think it's similar for companies. Try to have that authenticity and that human aspect.
Totally agree. And I think it's great that we met on LinkedIn, which is kind of focusing on that. I usually like to talk when I host like LinkedIn workshops and those kind of things. Like the company is like umbrella, right? That's the corporate brand, and people are those things that holding the umbrella to kind of stop you from getting wet. And if you look at it like that, everybody is important. And everybody's keeping the umbrella up, and it's also not only the people who are employed in the company, but also the customers, right? Everybody's holding that umbrella together, and that's the only way to work, right? Consistency and then co-creation with people and having a unique story that
Yep.
those people know how to tell.
Exactly. And I think it's a balance, right? Like between the corporate narrative or the company narrative and like the corporate guidelines and like the authenticity of the company and the personality of the company and your own personality and authenticity and creativity as an individual when you're like representing that company. I believe companies need to encourage their employees to be themselves on social, because that's how you connect with people, right? Like I believe in sharing your own kind of content and your own personality doesn't mean that you're not representing the company. And I can be myself, I can be Gwen and talk about brand while still representing Sinch and what we do and like stay corporate in some ways, right? I think it's feasible to do both.
Definitely. I totally agree. Uh, we got into a few topics that we can leave for the next time because I think talking about the brand, we can go more and more. I purposely didn't go into how we measure brand because
Right. Yeah.
that's a totally different topic that we'll talk about.
Yep.
But tell me and the people where they can find more information about you, reach out to you, have a conversation, and
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. I think you can search for Gwen Lafage. You'll see that I have like a yellow background on my photo, like my background here. So that's like the Cinch yellow, and I have a little B next to my name. You'll see that the Cinch logo is actually a B. I think like really see that, but once we tell it, then you cannot unsee it. But often I get asked, why do you have the B? And it is because of the Cinch logo. And in a way, I think I've embraced it as like be a connectors, and like they're also like very active, and I think that's a good representation. So but that's where you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active. I respond usually to people and love connecting and talking brand content. That's kind of one of my favorite topic.
Perfect. Guys, now it's the moment when you stop this episode, go back to the beginning, listen to everything again, because, Gwen shared a lot of great stuff. So you stop when you hear something new, something good. Reach out to Gwen, tell her, hey, I listened to you on the Funky Marketing Podcast. It never happened, but, maybe it will happen one day. But please, if you find this useful, and I hope you do, follow the podcast, share it with your friends, with anybody who might find this episode useful. Gwen, thanks again for spending an hour here with me talking about all stuff brand. Guys, for you, what I can say is see you in the next episode, and keep it funky as always. Cheers.
Thank you.